as well. And the meeting will start shortly, but in advance, I wanted to share with you some general housekeeping points. We have a range of excellent speakers here today, and we'd like to thank also the Honorable Minister Gospel Kadzako for being here. I wanted to let you know that for those joining us online, we'd like for you to engage in the chat box function, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. You can also let us know where you're joining us from today. Between both sessions, between our sessions today, there'll be an opportunity to share your observations through a poll, which we will initiate using an online tool called Menti. And to help keep some of the background noise to minimum for those of you that are online, we will ask that you turn off your microphones. The event will be conducted in English and French, and I would like to thank the organizers for providing that for us today. Following the meeting, there will be a recording, presentation of the video, and all the resource materials that we're using here today will be sent to the participants. So I will now turn to our official welcome and opening remarks from our esteemed speakers. And first up, we have a presentation from our Executive Director, Mr. Bertrand Delachapelle of the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. Bertrand, on video, over to you. Please watch your screens.
And a warm welcome to you all. Today is a call for input of a cross-border project called Digital Policies for Africa that is conducted by the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. This is a very important element in the activities of INGPN, which has existed as an organization for more than 10 years now. The goal and the purpose is to provide a platform for the exchange of regional voices on global digital policy making. You in this room, in this virtual room, are key digital policy experts from Africa and also from other regions, and it is a real pleasure to have you here with us. The overall purpose of this project is to conduct a broad mapping exercise of the rapidly expanding digital policy field in Africa. And this is about building and growing a community of policy actors to shape a common understanding of the challenges that we're all confronted with. Today's session is an open invitation to data contributors to provide input that will feed into a regional status report and also into learning modules that will be developed later on. And it will also provide a foundation for future editions of the Global Status Report, which is a separate publication. For this work, we partnered with an organization called Research ICT Africa, based in South Africa, that a lot of you may already know. And we partnered specifically with Alison Gilwald, its executive director, who is a world-leading expert in this field, highly recognized, and is entrusted with authoring the report in close coordination with INGPN. So before addressing the structure of this meeting, I want to say a few words about the spirit in which it should be conducted. We managed to organize recently knowledge dialogue workshops, and we have created in this respect a safe space to allow participants from different stakeholder groups, governments, companies, civil society, academia, and NGOs, to exchange ideas in a spirit of mutual respect on digital policy issues across the continent. And today's program has been developed for a more open dialogue among participants on the basis of this preliminary work. But the second element that I want to emphasize is that in these discussions and also in your activities later on afterwards, we all know that these are difficult issues, and I encourage you to look at these issues not as problems you have with each other, but as problems that you have in common and that need to address in common. Many issues can be formulated in very different ways, but a common framing, a common mutual understanding of what the problem is a prerequisite for finding any solution. And finally, I want to emphasize one thing, which is that most of those issues are deeply transnational. They are transnational because of the need for cooperation within the continent itself, between the different African countries. But it is also because a lot of measures are adopted outside of the African continent and impact African actors. And it is important to ensure that the voice of the African actors are heard and are contributing to the policies that are adopted elsewhere. So finally, about the structure of this meeting, it's very simple. It has two parts. The first one will be a presentation by Research ICT Africa of the findings from a synthesis report of the two knowledge dialogues that we've organized in the last few months. And it will present a certain number of trends and challenges. And we will ask your comments, including through a Menti poll, on those trends and challenges, whether there are things missing, whether you agree with those trends, whether you have ideas that things that could be added to this. And in that regard, I think an important line of discussion is less on the challenges themselves, but also on why a certain number of frameworks that have been agreed upon have not actually been implemented fully or as much as they could have been. And finally, the second part of the meeting today will be a panel discussion with very renowned interlocutors and speakers who will be sharing their perspectives on some of the topics that have emerged from the dialogues. And I will mention three of those topics. The first category of topics is related to infrastructure challenges and equipment. It can be the existence or not of data centers, reliable electricity, continental infrastructure in general. That's the first point. The second point is about harmonization. How much is desirable? How much is achievable? What is the connection with the concept of interoperability? Is harmonization an absolute goal, or should we aim for interoperability between different countries? And third, after infrastructure and harmonization, the question of value creation. How can we collectively make sure that the value that is derived from the digitalization and data is maximized? And most importantly, how do we make sure that there is both social and economic value that is created and that it is distributed more equitably, which is, I think, a problem and an issue that is very dear to the heart of the African discussions. So I'm looking forward to the interactions and the exchanges during this session today. And once again, Tracy Sinkumba-Fosten to guide you through the rest of the meeting. Thanks for being there.
Thank you very much to our executive de la Chapelle for welcoming us. I would now like to welcome the Honorable Minister Gospel Kazako from the Ministry of Information and Digitalization. Honorable Minister, I welcome you to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good morning for those of you who are in the morning hours. The Executive Director for Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network, Mr. Bertrand de La Chapelle, representative of the African Union Commission, our esteemed panelists, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. Let me first of all extend a warm welcome to you all, both invited guests that have physically joined us in Malawi's capital of Lilongwe, and those attending this event virtually from all over the world. I feel greatly honored that I have joined you at this important interaction, where we are accorded the golden opportunity to provide critical information and data towards cross-border digital policy issues. The contribution that we are making today through this interaction is of paramount importance, as it will ensure that African countries are moving together in tackling their challenges surrounding policy and regulatory challenges in their digital spaces. Distinguished invited guests, African countries are always left behind on most essential matters because we do not come together always and ensure that we are tackling our challenges jointly. A single force under the African efforts are being made that as a continent and not as an individual country, we come together, share knowledge, and analyze our existing capacity on cross-border digital policy issues. It is even more encouraging that through our interaction today and through similar knowledge sharing sessions, in the near future, African countries will be capacitated to pursue inclusive digital transformation that will be based on evidence. Through this report that we are inputting today, we are also ensuring that we have a robust Africa Agenda 2063 that puts help and assist African countries address their policy and regulatory challenges in the digital space. Distinguished invited guests, it is no secret that ICT is now a basic need and a step towards the future. And this is, of course, a stepping stone to attain higher milestones in all the sectors of our economies, be it healthy, agriculture, education, or any other. The realization of the aspirations for our countries towards wealth creation, urbanization, and industrialization, we shall be enabled by the adoption of various ICT solutions. Distinguished invited guests, it is my expectation and that of my brothers and sisters across the continent that through this report we are inputting today, efforts will be shown to ensure that a clear path for digital transformation will be clearly mapped out. Through this intervention, we need to begin tackling critical fundamentals that are making us be left behind, such as internet connectivity, ICT human capital development, and the weakness of our policy and regulatory frameworks. Distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude my remarks, allow me to once again express my profound appreciation that I have been invited to be part of this exciting journey. And as we attempt to transform our cross-border digital challenges across Africa, I therefore appeal to you all invited guests to this interaction that you assist this intervention by being as open as possible and as free as possible, and ensure that we have provided critical input towards the report. I thank you for your attention. May God bless Malawi, may God bless Africa, and may God bless all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. It's very encouraging to hear that we'll be collaborating together in the future, and the future is Africa. And I would just like to also welcome Miss Mary, Mama Mary, to the stand. You know, I've heard her being called Mama Mary, so I would like to invite you to the stand just to also welcome us here today and before we move on to the rest of the program. So thank you, Mama Mary.
The Honorable Minister, sir, thank you for coming, and other participants. And the Honorable Nima is here, I recognize you, and others that are here. This is an interesting session for us in Africa because we are trying to develop our cross-border trade, the African trade agreement that we have made. And if we don't have the right policies and we don't put the right mechanisms and processes in place, it might be difficult to transact within Africa for Africa. So it's an interesting session, and I'm happy to be here. And thank you for recognizing me and asking me to say a word or two. But I want us to be sincere when we answer the questions they may be posing to us, because I know we have difficulties. Jumia is from Nigeria, and Jumia is in other countries of Nigeria. But when I wanted to pay for my visa for coming to Malawi, it was difficult because my card, maybe it wasn't working well, or maybe it's from Nigeria. So those things are things that we need to focus on and come up with policies that will make it easier for us to transact for Nigeria and with Nigeria and within Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, Chairperson for the African IGF. And now I would like to, before we move on to our panel discussions, we would like to share with you a short video regarding the project, what it's about, and also how you can get involved. So please pay attention to your screens while we turn on the video. Thank you.
Digital technologies have the potential to drive economic growth and job creation across sectors and support global and regional interconnection. By implementing cross-border digital policies that harness the opportunities these technologies have to offer, African countries can improve well-being and sustainable development across the continent. To achieve this, policymakers need to better understand the cross-border dimensions of digital policy approaches and their effects, both direct and indirect. Our digital society has increasingly complex interdependencies, so ensuring evidence-based policy innovation and meaningful multi-stakeholder cooperation is fundamental. Since 2012, the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network, I&JPN, has been at the forefront of meaningful multi-stakeholder engagement of regional voices, and including African perspectives is now more important than ever. This is why I&JPN, with support from GIZ, is launching a 2-year project that will leverage existing networks of actors across the continent to frame, map, and address cross-border digital policy issues across Africa. Stakeholders from the continent have a vital part to play in addressing cross-border digital policies with a shared voice for Africans by Africans. Over 2 years, the project will have 3 phases. 1. Knowledge dialogue and consultations. 2. A dedicated status report that will map and showcase legal and technical approaches to cross-border digital policies in Africa. 3. Outreach and learning modules. Knowledge dialogue and consultations. There will be 2 knowledge dialogue and consultation workshops with African experts to support knowledge exchange within and across countries. These recurring workshops will allow to share knowledge, be acknowledged among peers, promote interaction with international stakeholders, and crowdsource priorities for the content of the status report. Status report on cross-border digital policy in Africa. Next, we will develop the first status report on legal and technical approaches to cross-border digital policies in Africa. This will be done through continent-wide data collection, including interviews and in-depth analysis of existing knowledge. It will serve as a valuable baseline for progress in the region and beyond, and represent the amplified and shared perspective of African digital policy practitioners. Outreach and learning modules. The key findings of the report will inform capacity building workshops, learning modules, and the basis of the findings of the Knowledge Dialogue and Status Report, tailor-made for African policymakers. By connecting African experts to co-create the pioneering status report on cross-border digital policy, we aim to provide a complementary platform for Africans to reframe and also broaden the international policy debate on data and cross-border data flows. Join us and be part of a conversation on digital cross-border policy that aims to amplify on the interests of over 1 billion people on the African continent. 1. Express your interest to contribute to the report and/or be part of the Knowledge Dialogue workshops to help shape the content of the status report. By doing so, you will also join our global knowledge network of hundreds of practitioners and data contributors. 2. Partner with us to share updates of this process and engagement opportunities with your networks. 3. Learn more www.internetjurisdiction.net/Africa.
Thank you for showing the video. I just wanted to highlight a few points from there. So what do we aim to achieve?
This is how I would learn to code if I could start over.
One second, there was technical difficulty. As shown in the video, there are 3 phases in this timeline. And phase 1 we have already conducted, which incorporates 2 phases, which included some knowledge dialogue workshops. First, before the knowledge dialogue workshops, there was the kickoff for the project, the Africa project that we're embarking on. And the objectives are to establish a recurring and safe space for practitioners and stakeholders from Africa to collect and frame the most relevant questions and to share expertise, to support peer-to-peer learning, to consult on upcoming trends and challenges, and to amplify African perspectives towards the global north. Following these phases, we will see the development of the status report, which was mentioned in the video, and finally, the development of learning modules. So how can you contribute to this process? This is why we are also here today. It's a data collection event and a call for input to contribute to the report that will be produced at the end of the year and authored by Research ICT Africa, RIA. We will invite you all at the end of this session to participate in interviews and the online survey, which will be made available at the end of the meeting. Now, without further ado, I would like to move on to our next session, which is a report on the findings of the African Data and Digital Dialogues report, which is a hybrid report of the knowledge dialogues that we had recently. So I invite Dr. Andrew Renz from Research ICT Africa to share that with us, and he's sharing that with us online. If we can put Dr. Andrew Renz online, please. Thank you. And he's still on mute. Andrew, could you take yourself off mute, please? Okay, we're just going to check what's going on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you very much. Over to you, Andrew.
All right. Well, thank you for this opportunity. Obviously, wish I was in Malawi with you all, so that I could speak to you in person. And thank you to the Honourable Minister and the Chairperson for introducing our session and our work here today. I'm going to be sharing my screen with you and for a brief presentation. if we can just wait a moment while we play with the technology, but we're still not getting. Tracy or anybody else, please tell me if you can't see a slide presentation. Because I understand you can all see my screen.
Yes.
Thank you. Excellent. So I'm going to talk to you today about our African data and digital dialogues. As you've heard, I'm a senior research fellow at Research ICT Africa, who have partnered together with Internet and Jurisdiction on this fascinating project. I'm going to start off talking about the context, the emerging significance of data in Africa. And we can see the significance from the different treaties, policy frameworks, and trade agreements that are taking shape. Some have already exist and some are taking shape now, which touch on the issues of both digital regulation and data policy. So the first of these is the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, the Malabo Convention. I have more to say on that in a moment. We have the African Continental Free Trade Area. I'm sure that's been much discussed already in the IGF. And we have the African Data Policy Framework. Very briefly, Malabo Convention, agreed in 2014, it's not yet in force, and deals with both personal data protection and cybersecurity. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement has 3 important protocols that will have to deal with data, and there's the Data Policy Framework adapted by the adopted by the AU in February 2022. I just need to check in with you. I'm sharing the screen and you're seeing it. Is that correct, Tracy?
Yes, correct, Andrew.
Oh, thank you very much, Martin. And you're hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can see your screen, and if you wouldn't mind going into presentation mode.
I'm not sure what that is.
You just need to click the little on the bottom right of your screen, I think it is. So you can do a slideshow.
That's not available on Linux.
Okay.
Yes, I run Linux, open source operating system, and Zoom and Linux are not always friendly. Just another reminder of how technology doesn't always work how we want it to, especially when we have proprietary technologies like Zoom involved. So I was speaking about the 3 instruments, and I'm going to just keep speaking about this. Sorry, to return a moment to the Malabo Convention. There is, this is not yet in force. And so obviously one of the concerns is that that until this is in force, this sort of simple legal basis or practical legal basis is missing from the policy and regulatory frame that we need as Africans to regulate data. We do have the African Continental Free Trade Area, the protocols, as I mentioned earlier, that are that are not in place yet. They are being negotiated. And each of these protocols does need to deal with the issue of data. The competition protocol needs to deal with the issue of data because data can be used or hoarded in anti-competitive way, and often data needs to be made available to enable better competition. The e-commerce protocol also needs to deal with data. Obviously, data flows and even data policy is not only concerned with e-commerce. However, it cannot avoid also being concerned with e-commerce. It's unavoidable that any data policy must address e-commerce issues, even though there are other data policy issues which are outside of e-commerce. Intellectual property protocol comes up primarily because although data has historically not been subject to copyright, patent, trademark, or other traditional intellectual property regimes, there are attempts to try and claim ownership over data using intellectual property. And so the intellectual property protocol has to basically ensure that these attempts don't succeed, because doing so would stifle data flows, inhibit competition, and prevent the use of data for the benefits that Bertrand spoke about. So I mentioned already the data policy framework. The framework is a policy framework, so it's not a policy as such. It's intended to enable the regions, the regional economic communities, and countries to set their data policies. So it is flexible and adaptable, since we have 54 countries that will need to create data policies or have data policies they might want to revise and update. It was adopted in February of this year. And some of the key themes were this idea of data benefit, mentioned by both the Honourable Minister and Bertrand, this idea that we don't want to see the benefit of data, the value of data, appropriated by a few, particularly a few platforms which may even be located outside of the continent. But instead that benefit must flow to Africans and to those who are most marginalized. In order to achieve this benefit, there needs to be essential infrastructure. See, the Honourable Minister was ahead of me, and he mentioned that factor too. We need trustworthy and secure enabling environments for data. Without this, individuals will not trust their data to systems, or they will provide incorrect or inaccurate data, and the value of data won't be realized. And the framework already adopted by the African Union is both principled and rights-based. It draws very firmly on the human rights commitments of African countries. So I'm now with that background in mind, let's move on to talking about the conversations, the dialogues. So you'll see we've tended to use the words dialogue and conversation interchangeably. And this is because dialogue, digital dialogue, data dialogue sounds good. But one of our participants in the second dialogue or conversation pointed out that a dialogue is between just two parties, or perhaps 2 points of view. But instead, what we have is a multi-stakeholder process in which there are multiple points of view, many of which converge, some of which have yet to find a meeting place. So we had held two multi-stakeholder conversations, the first on the 13th of December. That was an inter-African discussion. This was primarily between African stakeholders. On the 22nd of February this year, we held the second. We have a conversation between the African participants and global discussants. Both of these dialogues were held online. The first of these in both of these conversations, we had a series of aims. see, I'm jumping ahead of myself there. The dialogues aim to bring together experts, practitioners in, as Bertrand pointed out, a recurring and safe space. We want today's conversation in Lilongwe and online to be a continuation of that safe space. We want to collect and frame the most relevant questions, to share knowledge and expertise, to support peer-to-peer learning, and to consult on upcoming trends and challenges. I believe we've achieved this in our 2 dialogues. So you should see in front of you a slide in which we're talking about the stakeholder participation. This shows a world map. This is at the beginning of our process. In our first dialogue, we had over 35 registrations from 14 countries. So that was in December 2021. And then we asked our participants to self-identify. So you should see a pie chart in which participants identified as government, civil society, technical community, civil society, nonprofit organization, international organization.
Andrew, would
By
you
the way,
mind
all of
changing the
these
slides, as I think you're referring to one that we cannot see.
Okay.
Yes, better. Thank you.
I'm having to reshare.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I'll have to go back a couple. There we are. So you should see the pie chart. Martin, tell me if you can't.
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
Excellent. So moving on. We asked, do you think that cross-border digital policies will become increasingly important in the next 3 years? We got 63% of the people who thought that it would, some more agreement, 31%, and a few people who said that wouldn't become important. What's important to note here at this beginning of our process, we had initially focused in on data as much as later on. And so this is about digital policies generally, not just data. In the next slide, we asked, is there sufficient African coordination coherence to develop adequate cross-border digital policies? And there was quite a lot of disagreement. So we understood this in the context of the dialogues, not as a despairing, there will never be sufficient coordination and coherence, but rather a frank acknowledgement that there's a lot of work to do. So ultimately, we perceive this as just pointing out the importance of the work we're doing today and the work going forward of appropriate conversations and then ultimately of official coordination and coherence around cross-border digital policies. The third question is deceptively similar to the second question. We asked people if they agreed that there is sufficient African participation in international coordination and coherence mechanisms to develop adequate cross-border digital policies. Here, the question wasn't about Africans cooperating together just on the continents. Here, the question is asking, are we working together sufficiently to present the world with a powerful voice? And again, we had mostly a concern that we needed to do much more. So then we held the second workshop. This is the workshop in which we did engage with actors from Europe, from the United States, from across Africa, but also from the developing world outside of Africa. So we had Indian participants, including on some of our panels. And it was a very enlightening experience. The stakeholder group changed a little. I think we had more people who identified as government and more who identified as civil society. We also asked questions to this group. So here we asked whether the participants in the second grouping, so it included the global north participants and people from elsewhere in the developing world, do they think that collaboration and harmonization of laws is taking place? So it was a factual question. Most people agreed with that statement. Yes, it is taking place, or strongly agreed. A few didn't agree it is taking place, if they understood the question correctly. So it wasn't a question of whether you liked it or not. It was a question, is it happening? The next question is we asked, do you think that there is that the approach to cross-border data flows, do you think that that there's a kind of new way of regulating them? There's a new set of rights. And most people suggest that there was. So we didn't want to stop there and just get those sentiments. We asked for some open-ended questions. From that, we got a few interesting other alternatives, including the idea that we absolutely need to strengthen Africa-wide institutions, including the REX, the African Union, the need for digital infrastructure and skills, the need for entrepreneurism and digital inclusion, the need to change university curricula to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution and to deal with the impact of automation. And a good summary, an important issue is how Africans can improve the value of their data in the global data economy. So at this point, we, after both, during the course of the knowledge dialogues, actually, we, sorry, I seem to have skipped my slides ahead. I'm going to go back. We identified clusters of themes. There were some 16 either statements or questions during the, sorry, I seem to be fighting with the slide control. So we had 16 questions, which we summarized as issues about data, about policies, about the data economy, about infrastructure, and about justice and society. One of the concerns is that around data is that we weren't just talking about personal data, but we're also speaking about non-personal data, which is economically important, can also be politically important, it can be important for development purposes. Around policies, there's some concern that Africa needs to develop its own policies. There's some people strongly in favor of looking at the European Union GDPR as something that Africa should emulate. Others were less convinced about that, although nobody had provided a really strong alternative. When it came to the data economy, there was concerns around the flow of data for the African Continental Free Trade Area. With infrastructure, there's obviously data infrastructure as well as, and the big issue there is data centers. And for justice and society, there were concerns around gender, there's concerns around equality, and there are concerns around cultural sensitivities around data. So in the second conversation, we discussed 4 questions. I'm going to read them to you, but they're actually questions that are open-ended and could usefully resonate today. So, should countries without the prerequisites for data centers, such as capital, suitable climates, reliable electrical power, high-speed data connections, and the like, partner with other African countries to efficiently create continental infrastructure? So, as a South African, of course, this hits home for me. South Africa lacks, as you know, reliable electrical power. And so that's a challenge for building data centers. So is there a way that South Africa can partner with other countries that perhaps could provide reliable electrical power? Similarly, countries in the tropics may not have a climate which makes it easy to cool the data center. They may want to partner with countries that have more suitable climates. Second question was, we acknowledge that African countries are at different stages of data readiness. So what core areas and issues should be the focus of harmonization and the objectives for the continent in order to create a developmentally driven common digital market? So here the concern is, we know that there's a lot of difference in the very different contexts of countries across Africa. But what things can we work on together? And then, how can a trusted environment for value creation from data be created? How can the objectives of data protection and public value creation from both personal and non-personal data be aligned? So here there's a perceived tension between protecting personal data and realizing value from data. But there's also the suggestion that that tension can perhaps be a productive one, that there are ways to both protect data and realize value, public value. And then the fourth question is, how can African actors influence global governance agendas and outcomes in the interests of the continent, and specifically to ensure the realization of global digital public goods? What opportunities are there for developmental data value creation? So these questions we pondered in the second workshop. And I wouldn't say we came to decisive conclusions. That's part of the ongoing dialogue. So conclusions thus far, perhaps steps along the way, or how we've built out so far on the knowledge dialogue workshops. Some of the emerging narratives are the concern that data must be for development. Others are concerns around data justice. So this concerned both the issues around issues like gender, but also that the value from data not be captured by a few. Then there's the building of an African economy. And what was one of the significant observations I heard in this was the concern that data flow is important for an African economy, not just for e-commerce as such, but just for the flow of physical goods and services. So this obviously draws on the work of Joseph Stiglitz and Kenneth Arrow 30 or 40 years ago about the role of information in the economy, and there will not be an integrated African economy without appropriate information flow. Then there was this concern about building an African, I've called it a data sphere. I think on mature consideration, it's a part of the global data sphere. So it's, the mathematicians would tell us, as a spherical cone or a spherical section. So building an African spherical section, if we want to be mathematically correct, an area in which data flows within Africa to enable the development not only of an African economy, but of further integration between African countries. So that brings us to the issue of cross-border data flows, and then Africa's global voice. How can Africa's voice be heard, a united voice around on issues of data in the various global fora where data policy is made? So all of this was made possible by support from GIZ, and so we want to say thank you to GIZ for supporting the work. And at this point, I'm going to be able to hand back to Tracy, and so we can continue our conversation.
Thank
Obviously,
you very
I'm
much.
ready.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Sorry.
obviously, I'm ready. Obviously, I can answer any questions or respond to any other comments as part of the panel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Andrew Renz. We'll have an opportunity to do that. But before we open the floor for questions, this is an interactive part for you all now so that we can all start getting the questions flowing. And I will ask Joshua now to help share an online survey that we'll do with you all physically in the room and those who are joining us virtually. We're asking 2 questions to you all, and you will see the questions show up on your screen. This will require you to have access to your telephones and to click on the link that will show up on your screen, which will be showing up shortly. There we go. So the first question to you all. There is strong coordination among African countries regarding digital policy issues. Over to you to share your responses. And you need to click the code.
What's the link?
The link first and then the code, which is 8114-7485. So we can see the responses coming in now. I'll give you about 20 seconds. Let's see. Okay. So we're getting responses that neutral, disagree are the top. Disagree is the top answer right now. Strongly disagree, yeah. It's between neutral and disagree for the moment. Our online participants, I hope you're also joining in. I think for now we can say that the responses that are coming in are disagree. So if we can now move on to the next question, Joshua. There is strong The African Union has adopted several data policy instruments. What do you hear as the key narratives underpinning the adoption of these? So this is an open text box and you can either put in some words or a sentence. I'll give you a minute to respond. It'll be nice to have some music playing while we do this, right? So, Weisbo, would you mind? You can put on your.
Thank you.
Sharing the responses so far.
I'm seeing some comments coming through. One participant saying disjointed. Another one saying in-country bureaucracy, harmonization of the laws, African single market as the long-term goal, then enabling Africans to harvest the potential of infrastructure, economic integration. Just kindly scroll up so we can see the comments.
Joshua, can you scroll up so we can see some comments?
Data protection, then lack of political will among member states to endorse policy instruments, too much influence of European regulations, data integrity, lack of necessary legal framework, that the AUC wants to establish and consolidate Africa's voice in global data governance, as well as create enabling environment for more
equitable
data flows.
Okay.
Then how to influence global digital governance discussion. And I'm seeing something on localization of data at the instance of member states, promotion of e-commerce and digital trade. Please keep your comments.
Yes, please keep them coming. So we'll keep this open for a few more minutes. But while we do that, I think it is a good time. And Andrew, if you're staying on the line, we'll have some questions as well for you afterwards. But I think it's a good time for us to welcome our distinguished panelists, who will be moderated by Waiswa Abudu Salam. Most of you know him who are in this room. He's from the Uganda Communications Commission, and also is working with us here at the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. He will be welcoming our panelists and guiding them through their perspectives and their responses to some of the questions that we had posed to them. So without further ado, I hand over to you, Waiswa, so you can welcome our guests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, all our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for making time to join us for this panel discussion, where we are going to try and discuss the issue that we've seen from the reports and this whole data collection survey process. My name again is Abdusalam Waiswa, and on this panel I've been joined by three distinguished ladies from across Africa. First, on my left, a lady who leads a multi-stakeholder engagement across Africa for the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and focuses on advancing good practices in policy and regulation framework for affordable and meaningful access to broadband access. Please join me in welcoming Madam Onika Mukwakwa to this panel. She's from Nigeria. We're also joined by Honorable Neema Lugangira, who is a member of parliament from Tanzania. She sits on the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Social Services and Community Development in Tanzania, and also on the Cross-Cutting Committee of the Parliament of Tanzania on HIV/AIDS, TB, and drugs. Earlier today, she was endorsed overwhelmingly as the founding chairperson of the African Internet Governance Forum. Welcome with me, Honorable Neema Lugangira. Next to Honorable Neema is Lilian Naluoga. Lilian is a technology enthusiast and an advocate from the civil society in Uganda. She's the president of Uganda Internet Society and has many years of experience in working on issues, internet governance, democracy, ICTs for development. Please welcome with me, Lilian Naluoga. Colleagues, this panel, the objective is for us to try and interrogate the issues that have come through from the reports, but also to invoke our discussion and thought on some of these topical issues regarding the data regulatory framework and landscape in Africa. So we will participate in a small panel discussion here, but even you, the audience, will have a chance to pose questions, but also share comments regarding these questions. I'll begin with you, Madam Onika. From the discussion you've seen and the report you've seen, different members contributing about the need for harmonization in Africa. Would you kindly share with us your thoughts on whether you think there is need for African countries to work together on these digital policies?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. Certainly, there is a need for African countries to collaborate on data issues in the continent. However, as I reflect on the comments that many of you in this room and those online made with regards to the survey that we just took, I think there's just some key issues that we need to attend to that have been standing in our way from achieving this. I recall one of them being mentioned here as lack of political will. And I'm so happy to be sitting here with Honorable Nima because I think her network might be the early stages and beginning of us to actually begin to address this challenge around the lack of political will to actually get this done. The solutions have been amongst us. The ideas have been amongst us, but implementation has consistently eluded us, largely because of the lack of political will, but also perhaps it's an opportunity for us to begin to interrogate exactly why is it that we have such great ideas about collaborating, but we simply just do not do it? Perhaps it's time for us to move away from the novelty of the ideas. We think the ideas are good. We think the ideas are solid in terms of bringing us together, but perhaps an honest conversation about why is it that we don't do what we say we are going to do, and why is it that we continuously fail to collaborate. Adopting another treaty, other documents, it just becomes a bit too performative when there is no consequence for failure to implement what we've committed ourselves to.
Very, very, very instructive, and indeed, very instructive comments. And you can hear, we are privileged to have on this panel a politician, because indeed, a lot of the discussions usually rotates around, yes, you are going to discuss as technocrats. How about the politicians? Honorable Nema, today you've been overwhelmingly endorsed as the chair of the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. Could you kindly share with us some of your thoughts and ideas for other members of parliament across Africa on how we can possibly achieve this dream of harmonization on digital policy issues in Africa?
Thank you very much. As introduced, my name is Nima Lugangira, Member of Parliament from Tanzania, and also Chair for the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance that got launched today. And I also wish to recognize the presence of our Deputy Chair, Honorable Alhaji Mbo, who's in the room as well. First thing that I would like to just say is that over the years, the discussions and the development of digital policy, the advocacy has been done by the ICT sector, the tech world, in exclusion of parliamentarians. So usually that discussion happens by the tech world, and it is then expected that us who sit in parliament would endorse what was prepared in our absence. But we forget that when it's not tech laws, if it's other sectoral laws, and parliaments pass those laws without engaging all stakeholders, stakeholders usually raise their voice. And I would say, my sister here on the left, civil society will be the ones at the forefront in saying that the people have not been consulted, this group has not been consulted, but over time, the digital policy development has happened without us being there as parliamentarians. So with that, there is a huge gap of understanding, which we must recognize. There's a huge gap of understanding, not that it's anyone's fault, but it is the unfortunate reality which we must face. So one of the things that the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance hopes to do is to build and bridge that capacity gap amongst parliamentarians. Because you'll find that in most of our national parliaments, even members of parliament who are in ICT committees do not necessarily have ICT backgrounds. And that is the whole crust of being in parliament. You get exposed into sectors that you were not exposed in. For example, I got into parliament from the agricultural sector, mining sector. Like, I know those sectors. Like, you can wake me in the middle of the night and I would be able to speak about them. But I got into parliament and I was put in one of the committees that you mentioned, HIV, AIDS and drugs. I'd never before been exposed to drug things, drug-related, drug abuses, going to prisons to look at drug issues, and on all of this. So those are new areas. So we must appreciate that, but just to conclude, the ICT and the policy development on ICT cannot be done by the ICT sector alone. We have to remember it's a multi-sectoral issue. Because when we're talking about ICT, it will have an impact on health, it will have an impact on education, it will have an impact on business. So how are we also going to bring on board those sectors? And that in itself can give us more robust digital policies that speak to the different sectors in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Nema. And indeed, as the ICT sector, we are very much honored that politicians are joining us on board. And you raise valid points, really. If we sit here and we talk about policy issues without involving the people who actually have the key to transforming those policies into actionable points, then I think that has been a big mistake on our part. So we're very privileged at this time round. We have politicians on board, and I think we are all optimistic that we shall see a lot arising out of this. If I move to my sister Lillian from the civil society, certainly, I think from the statistics, it is clear that everybody believes that data is now very much important, and different African countries are coming up with different policies at AUC level, national levels. Could you please share with us your thoughts on data localization? I'm seeing so many African countries talking about we keep our data to our countries. We cannot share our data with our neighbors. What are your thoughts about this? And do you think this presents any opportunities or any serious threats to the success of Africa in this data ecosystem?
Thank you so much, Chair, and thanks for inviting me to speak on behalf of civil society, representing many voices. For some in the room, I think the umbrella to which I was introduced under the Internet Society Uganda chapter, there are also members in the room who also know me under the umbrella of CIPESA, which is the Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. And probably CIPESA has done quite a number of work on these issues, especially digital policy issues. On the issue of data localization, we need to, first of all, I think in the survey, the results, we've seen the importance of, digital or the free flow of data, what the benefits there are. When we talk about localization, one is there are underlying issues as to why countries are coming up with localization. And these are many from ensuring, data privacy, protection or cybersecurity. Let's have on data centers, let's try to control this for the protection of our citizens. We've also seen governments pushing, issues of supporting law enforcement. And I'm glad that for the last 3 days, I was in a session that was mainly on cybersecurity, and I think at one point, I reached a point that I was, in that session, I felt like I'd received a PhD on cybersecurity, but I mean, data localization is cybersecurity, national security. There are governments that are concerned about censorship or surveillance, of their, protecting, their citizens, but there are also issues of, to do with economic benefits and the like. Is it a good thing? To those who are proposing data localization, of course, it's more of protecting national interests. But we've also seen research coming out saying that this may not help. It may not be fruitful for Africa to go this way right now, because one is, for many countries in Africa, we are still even trying to just come up with a simple thing like a data protection and privacy law. And looking at the way that data enables, e-commerce, we are no longer just trading amongst ourselves. We are trading with global companies, and if at all, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the importance of, being global and encouraging this sharing of data and what it can do for, the free flow of data, what it can do for national development, or even just, digital economy. So when we go into saying that let's do data localization without looking at the risks that need to be first addressed, issues of privacy, how are we protecting this data? So for instance, there are quite a number of laws, say the data for the countries that are coming up, with the data localization requirements, they are kind of putting these under their legislations. For instance, countries like, say, Zambia, Kenya, Chad, Uganda, South Africa, there are particular clauses that have restrictions, on data, what can be shared. And the main thing is about, data protection, kind of measures. And there are those that are particularly looking at sectors like, say, in Rwanda, there are data localization requirements that are looking at, how data between telecommunications should be traded. But again, we are living in a global world. When you bring these things and you're pushing to have data centers managed, it's going to benefit just a few. And these would be the people who are rich, the people who are owning this kind of, who are investing in these data centers. It will be benefiting just such. It is expensive. For instance, the legislation can be there. The implementation is going to be very hard, very tough on Africa that is just going into to appreciate the benefits of data economy. You need to look into the cost factor when it comes to, say, coming up with this massive data. It requires managing the data. It requires the skills, whether it is the human skill, the human factor, in terms of expertise, whether it's running this physicality of having this center, where the data is going to be hosted. And when you look also at other factors like, say, electricity, in many African countries, there's still the issue of, power, electricity, that, for instance, if you localize data and you have this massive, let's say, if this entire place was built to be, all data, say, in Malawi is going to be localized and we have our data controlled there, and there's this national, shutdown, there's a break in power, you're going to find there are so many flaws and there will be lots of negativities. So I think, is it a good thing? Yes, it can be a good thing, but then there are certain requisites that need to be, kind of taken and addressed for this to work. But is Africa ready to go into this? I don't think we should be going this way. So there has to be this easing flow of data to enable us to be able to appreciate the digital transformation that we are looking at, and for us to be able to trade with other, regions in the world. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lillian, for that elaborate response to that. Honorable, you want to supplement something on data localization?
Yes, I just wanted to add on the importance of not just looking at one side of the coin, but also ensuring that we're protecting the users. Because I'll just give one example, and this is something that was even raised in the 2 days policy symposium that we had with members of parliament, that you find that our telecom companies, they all have our numbers. And all of a sudden, you're receiving messages that are giving you, let's say, COVID information, but you didn't ask for the COVID information. You just bought a line from a certain telecom company. Is that allowed? Is that okay? Why should the telecom company kind of sell your number to a third party to use and for you to be collecting all of these advertisement that you really didn't sign up for? So there's that issue. But then the other issue, when we're talking about the storage of data localization, but at the moment, most of the data is stored in the cloud, in entities that are owned by foreign, or should I say foreign or international multinationals. So where is that data jurisdiction? So that is something also that we also have to remember. And when we're developing our policies, to know the dynamics of this cyberspace. Because I could be here in Malawi, but my data is stored somewhere in the space, and the person who owns the satellite is a different country, or things like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, that is a very important issue as we think about these policies of data localization. Remember, most of the data is being kept on the cloud, and there are already legal questions. Who controls the cloud? In which country is the cloud? These are all topical issues that I think all of us as a continent, we've got to focus on. But speaking about data and the value of data, I just want to put a question to you, colleagues on the panel. Do you think African countries and Africans in this room and those following us online have appreciated the value of data? That indeed the data they have is now something resourceful, something from which they can get a lot of money from. Let me put this to Madam Monica. What are your thoughts on this? Do we appreciate the value of data as Africans?
I think at the consumer level, it's beginning to resonate with people about giving up their data. But if you really look at how we have developed digitally, a majority of our citizens are still not very much engaged online. And when they are, they're engaged on free platforms, mostly social media, that I mean, the ecosystem on social media is that you give out your information for free and we are able to engage and interact and what have you. So to a certain extent, not really, but I think also the discourse in those platforms has helped educate consumers in the continent around data and the importance of their own data. But I think for me, I often have trouble when I hear comments like data is the new oil, data is the new gold, or what have you, because my question is simply, what good did gold do for Africa and what good did oil do for Africa, right? So I find that some of our development does not really take lessons from the past. And actually that's how our digital development is going as well. We are going technology first, policies maybe later, but the difference is that we are also now in a very fast moving field. You know, when you're dealing with technology, by the time you get around your head on the policies and the policy environment we need, things have changed so much and advanced so quickly, such that we are constantly not owning and consuming online, but not necessarily owning online, because we just have not shaped our digital development to position Africans as controllers and owners online. And that's why this discussion of collaboration and cross-border is so important, because you know, as a bloc, we have a better chance to even, you know, if one country decided to oppose GDPR, for example, they've got less of a chance to be able to deal with that and have that kind of influence than if we came together as a bloc to say, as Africans and as African consumers, these are the issues that we have, and we'd like to, you know, coordinate that response in that way. The challenge has been that we continue to have this individualized but not at different stages. Different countries are at different stages. Some countries still have 25% of their population that needs to go online, and other countries still have more than 50% of their populations that need to go online. And so how do we figure out a way as a continent to leverage each other's strengths and to, which also will minimize the weaknesses of each of our countries. And on digital, we have to figure it out very quickly because, again, it's a fast-moving area, and we are just right now still innovating for the Western gaze. We are not innovating for our own problems, for our own solutions, to address our own development. We are still innovating because we want the next Uber of Africa, the next Amazon of Africa. The next Amazon of Africa might actually look like Makola Market in Accra. And so how do we look at Makola Market in Accra and begin to innovate in a way that is about solving and creating and expanding that Makola Market, so I can sit in South Africa and order my shea butter from a market woman in Accra, as opposed to always looking for these models that have not really worked for us. But also we have a history outside of digital space about how Africa has developed in these economies. We don't want to repeat the same kinds of exclusive economies that we have in the brick and mortar space. The digital economy has to be inclusive.
Thank you very much. Indeed, speaking about oil, other minerals, and how Africa was left behind, indeed, even the data economy, if we continue folding our hands, then the bus will go by past us, and then we shall continue lamenting as Africans. So I think this positions us well to see how best we can benefit and jump onto the ship before it goes so far. Lillian, from your perspective in civil society, how would you advise a young African watching us today to possibly take advantage of this digital revolution and see how they can improve the value of their data online, but also for the African economies to reap the benefit that they deserve from this digital revolution?
Thank you, Chair. I think for me, if we are looking and also building to what Onika just shared, that this whole thing, yes, data may be the new oil, it may be the new gold, but how do we plug in there? And for me, for the young Africans, the simple response is innovation. I mean, for all the reasons that we are seeing people connecting online, is social media. It is Facebook, and now I think TikTok has taken over. But just think if we had an app, like TikTok, which was, if TikTok was developed by an African, how much revenue would come from data, from the content, advertising on these platforms. And this is the model that the platforms work with. So for me, to the young generation is to learn the value of data. Because yes, it may be the new gold, but who is taking this gold? And right now there's some kind of, digital colonialism that we are keeping a blind eye on. And how do we react? We react with regulation, just further stifling the little innovations that we have. I mean, in many countries in Africa, shutdowns of social media platforms or internet is becoming the new norm. But again, if there was a way of trying to come up with initiatives that make the young Africans appreciate the value of being online. Yes, if it is producing content in terms of, say, content is diverse. It could be, what we see, the TikToks, the videos, the music, all that is content. And that's how these platforms are earning. I mean, look at YouTube, Google, they're earning through that. If we have this pushing, and this involves, of course, I'll go still back to the state, to government, creating this enabling environment for data to flow. Regulation is important, but there needs to be some sort of support
mechanism from the government.
Yes.
I think certainly we can't run away from the fact that government dictate how people move. And I think that we cannot possibly pretend that government plays a very critical role in doing this. But speaking about that, the African Union, as you are aware, adopted the African Continental Free Trade Area with a very ambitious plan to ensure that Africa is connected. Africans are able to trade freely amongst themselves. And we think in this digital environment, the African Continental Free Trade Area, if it is well implemented, well followed through, Africans stand to benefit a lot. From where you sit, Madam Monica, do you think as an African, they should be very much hopeful that the African Continental Free Trade Area will really change their lives? If you're speaking to somebody in Ghana, an African in Rwanda, in Uganda, should they be optimistic that this agreement is going to make their life any better?
Well, I was hoping I don't get that question because I'm very cynical when it comes to some of these issues, unfortunately. So what I think is that it's going to take more than just government. It's going to take government doing what government needs to do. It's going to take private sector investing in the right way, but it's also going to take civil society doing what we know civil society does best, and that is holding them accountable and demanding that we actually implement certain things, right? So it's no longer, I think, time for us to come to these meetings and talk about Goal 2030, and then 2030 arrives and we say, you know, Beijing plus 30. I think those days are over. We have a young generation that desperately needs for us to do what we say we are going to do and actually have a consequence management agenda around failure to perform. And that really comes to leadership. You know, I think that we have a serious leadership challenge in the continent that affects most of these, the implementation of most of these great ideas. Our young people cannot afford to have this lackluster development that we have been very patient with. You know, we often hear how Africa is not poor, it's just poorly managed. Now that we know that, what is it that we are going to do to ensure that this poor management does not set another generation stuck in poverty again? So when it comes to this free trade agreement that Africa is envisioning, it also starts with a free flow of people. You know, goods are not going to just move by themselves first. So the fact that we are still struggling to even get visas to access each other's countries, for me, makes me very cynical that we are going to get to a point where we actually even allow goods to flow freely. Goods do flow, and yes, there's regulation. There's regulation for market competition, but there's also regulation for consumer protection as well. But what is it that we are willing to do differently this time? Because goods have been flowing, maybe with some difficulty. What is it that we are willing to do differently this time to ensure that this is not just a great slogan because someone told us Africa is rising and we think we should be rising, but how are we making sure that the pilots of that flight, if Africa indeed is rising, are Africans? And that Africa is not just rising for a market of goods coming from overseas into our continent, but that we are also innovating and creating those kinds of goods that make it valuable and beneficial for us to be in this free trade. So in short, I would say it's a great start, it's a great idea, but we really need to be serious about the entire ecosystem that's needed for that to happen. Can we get sub-regional roaming? Like, you know, low-hanging fruit, sub-regional roaming agreements. We've been talking about them for years. Nobody's even talking about them now. I think we've all just kind of accepted that when you cross the border, your network drops you, even though the same company exists in the next country you're going to. So now we're up and next to the next big thing. It's, you know, free trade throughout the continent. How are we holding each other accountable for all these agreements? I think for me is what I'm struggling with.
Very, 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 very instructive points. One of my best trips, I think, was the trip to Malawi, to Lilongwe. For the first time, I walked from my house in Kampala and was able to walk to the airport without a visa, went to Addis without a visa, came to Lilongwe without a visa, without even anybody asking me where I was going. I felt like, yes, this is the world that we all deserve to live in. And I hope many other African countries can borrow a leaf from possibly what happened between Uganda and Malawi. Let's work on these agreements to facilitate free flow of our people from one country to another. I think this is the Africa that we all aspire. This is the Africa that our forefathers, the Nyereres, they died for. This is the Africa that the spirits of our forefathers, I'm sure, are all looking up to. But I know we are coming to the end of this panel discussion. I know the audience could also be having questions, comments to make about the discussion here, and you're free to show your hand. We'll be happy to pick on you and share your comments. But before we pick that, I want to ask Honorable Nema, from a politician's perspective, what are those small actionable points that you think a politician in Africa should think about in driving this African harmonization agenda? Because it is important. And whatever the reason, I think there is unanimous understanding that if we are to make a difference as a continent, we must work together. How can the politicians on the continent make this possible? Honorable.
Thank you. Very quickly, what I can say first is that when we're talking about the issue of data, it's very broad, as you know, my fellow panelists here have shared. And most governments understand the value of data because they use data to make plans of their government budgets, etc. But we, the people, don't yet understand the value of data, because that is why we tend to offer our data free. If we understood the value of data, we wouldn't, be offering it for free. But then there are challenges, even when we're talking about this, how can countries have harmonization of data, etc.? There are digital gaps that we must recognize. Digital literacy, digital skills. So you may have very good data in the urban areas, but what about the peripheral areas, which are often forgotten? I come from a peripheral region called Kagera, bordering Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. Takes 2 days on the road to there, from Dar es Salaam to Kagera, closer to go to Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. So the people there, will they have the skills and the knowledge to collect, store, and organize the data digitally? Because here, the data we're kind of talking about, it has to be digital. So to be able to do that, we need to address these gaps. And just to conclude, whilst we're still discussing and figuring out this issue of data management, data policy, harmonization, there's this big unknown thing of artificial intelligence that has come up. Oftentimes we in Africa find ourselves catching up. Europe has already done it, and there'll be EU-related policies, etc. And Africans have to end up doing copy and paste, and they don't even fit the local context. So it's important to understand the sheer opportunities and challenges and risks of artificial intelligence, but it's coming. Now, all of these, actually it's already here, but most African countries are not ready. Now, when we're talking about, just to conclude, the harmonization of these facts, not all African countries have data protection acts or policies. So there's still a gap even in that space. And to finalize, again, I go back to the issue of capacity building. I'll just share one example. Previously, I may not have been maybe so big into data protection or understand the seriousness or the urgency of it until I experienced one of the most horrific online abuse sometime last year. It was like, we always get it as women in politics, but this one was the most extreme online abuse that I've ever experienced, to the point that my kids are trying to tell me to get off online. And that is when it hit me that, okay, these people are taking pictures that I post myself, making memes and putting other people's heads and making all these kind of graphic edits. But as an MP, there's nothing that I could do. So suddenly I was like, we need our data to be protected. So you can see the thing that pushed me into data had nothing to do with what the ICT people are talking about. It was a personal experience. But there needs to be capacity building for parliamentarians on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable. I think now I'll open this to the floor. I'll go ladies first. Please tell us who you are, which country, organization, and then go direct to the comment or question that you want to put forward.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Evelyn Namara, and I work for the Alliance for Affordable Internet. So I actually want to pick from the point that the Honorable, I think, closed off from, and that's the need to build our own resources in Africa. We talk about data, but when you think about how many data scientists do we have on this continent, we have to start from the resource. Are we actually resourcing our own Africans to be data analysts and data scientists? Because that's where it starts. When you think about data is numbers. Numbers are then turned into analysis. You have to analyze that data into trends, infographics, and then that becomes information that is then used to inform policy. And these are some of the policies that then drive, whether it's agriculture, immigration, and all of these different sectors. But you find that if you're doing any research, you will not find data that is actually run by most Africans. You probably find your data sets from the World Bank or all of these other entities, but where are the local people who are actually running some of these data sets? So we have to also start from the capacity building of not just people who are using data, but do we have the resource to start telling our school young children to get into data science, to get into data analysis? And then from there, we can always have a much concrete conversation about data with more informed people who are helping us. So I think that's a good starting point as well.
Thank you very much. Building a critical mass of African data experts. Thank you very much for that contribution. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. This is Panslate from the Gambia IGF. Thanks for the brilliant panelists. I just want to say that, we always talk about the Africa we want, which is Agenda 2063. And it seems we have not done enough. I don't think I'll be around when it happens, when we get to 2063. And if we are realistic, except by God's grace, most of us here won't be around in 2063. So the work begins now. And when I say the work begins now, I believe the African Union has to take a cue in having a data-centric approach in what they do, like helping African countries. We are talking of AFICTA. Why don't we have an African data center? We are talking of hosting stuff in the clouds and stuff like that. Our young Africans are the one controlling what happens now in fintech. So to say we don't have a critical mass of people who are trained within the Africans locally and the Africans in the diaspora, I totally don't agree, because you look at the whole fintech space, especially what has happened from COVID, from March 2020 till date, how young Africans below the age of 35 have changed the narrative of how fintechs work in this continent. A lot can be done. But our governments to have to take heed, because all these cloud solutions we talk about in terms of data, even in country. I'll give you an example. My MP is sitting here. He's an IT professional. He moved from the States back to Gambia. And you will see that our driving license is done by one company, our ID card is done by another company, and you will find that in many African countries. So even locally, we are not even doing things, we are not even harmonizing the data. Before we talk of the cloud, let us act locally and let us use our MPs, I'm addressing my MP here too, to make this happen, that in terms of data localization home first. Who deals with our national ID cards? Who deals with our driving license issues? That is a starting point. In Ghana, they did it well. They went with their digital ID card, and it's working. You can travel with that digital ID card across Africa. Across West Africa, you don't need a passport, and that is where we should start taking cue from. I didn't know the African Union had a passport until my MP is telling me that he showed me the passport, So these are things that can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think the conversation about Africa and what we need to do right, we can speak until the animals go home, like we usually say back home. And this is the kind of conversation we want to keep on. And I want to remind you, the audience and ladies and gentlemen, that the data collection is now open. I think the link will be shown on the screen for all of us to know and get the credentials. We invite all of you to kindly participate in this online data survey so we can get your views on how we can reshape the landscape, the governance structures of the African internet and jurisdiction policy issues. This report is meant to help Africa get some source, some guidance on how best we can move from where we are to somewhere better. We think if we work together, we can add a brick to the Africa that we all aspire to see in 2063. Indeed, we may not be alive at that time, but our children, our grandchildren will be proud that we sat here today and we talked about this. So I invite all of us to save some time, share our comments, and can we please make our comments open, constructive, because at the end of the day, we want to have holistic feedback, positive, good or bad, but we want candid feedback that will inform policy interventions going forward. I'm not sure if there is any other comment. I've seen a question from Benjamin online. He was asking if there is any attention on responsible data sharing for innovation, especially in the face of a lot of data protection and privacy narrative. Basically, him posing a question that yes, we cannot talk about effective innovation if we are limiting people from freely sharing data that can possibly guide them in coming up with more innovative solutions that can maybe transform our society. So I think as we think about data protection, privacy, data localization, we must always create enough exceptions and room for innovators to receive this information, use it for the good of the public, because at the end of the day, data shapes what we do for the good of our society. I think we'll receive one more comment before I invite the panelists to give their closing parts. Yes, sir. Head with your name and the country, organization that you represent.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Peter by name, so I'm from Nigeria. So I would say I'm the data protection officer. So I've actually audited for the past 2 years. I've audited almost like 20 international organizations based on Nigeria data protection regulation as well as GDPR. So what I would just submit is this, we've heard this, that data is the new oil, but data is not the food. Okay, so from what we've seen, and we could see that many organizations, I'm speaking from the experience from the field, that a lot of people actually doesn't understand what data is. When you ask, what are the data you hold, they cannot even tell. Even the metadata they have, they cannot. How can they share data? So we're talking about cross-border data sharing. So if we don't understand the kind of data we hold, how do we share it? Even governments have multiple collection of data. So how they don't even know the value of those data. So these are where we need to actually pick that conversation from before we start talking about cross-border data. What about cross-institutional data? sectorial sharing of data. So these are the things that we need to start talking about, and our government actually they need to understand the importance of this and put the necessary legislation in place, as well as the action. Another thing I would like to touch on about the data localization. From what I've seen from the field, a lot of user, because when you're talking about data, user actually drive the data. Many of them don't trust the action of the government. You're asking them to come and host their data locally. So what happened during the election period? What happened when you shut down the internet, the heart of the business? So these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves when we're talking about data localization, cross-border data sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think I will allow Honorable to take the floor before Dr. Also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this actually has been really a very interesting topic when you talk about data. But there's one thing I just want to mention, because oftentimes, like you just said, we hold on to information or data within the continent or within the country, but we are not really sure exactly what we have. Now, for those of you that have or may have applied for loans before in the commercial banks in your countries, there is something they call the Credit Reference Bureau. This system actually houses data from all the customers of all the banks in your country. So essentially, the banks actually are sharing data within the country itself. Now, the next thing is, once you apply for a loan, for example, I'm with Standard Chartered Bank or Standard Chartered Bank, the bank will actually take my data and then query the system to find out exactly if I have a loan from another bank within the country, or if I was delinquent in a previous loan that I took from another bank. So essentially, we've already started doing that. The only thing we need to do is we need to take it another step forward, so that not only within the country, but across the border, in the region, and also across the continent. That's exactly where we need to go. But how do we manage that, and how do we control in terms of regulations, in terms of laws? How do we do that? I think that's the biggest question, and that's the fundamental question that we need to be asking ourselves. What next? Because we've already started. Now we want to go outside our country. What do we do? What laws govern? Because the laws in Gambia is different from laws in Senegal, as far as data is concerned. The laws in Nigeria, Ghana, they're all very different. Now, for me, I think it's about time we, as a continent, come together to the table and devise policies, strategies, laws, or even regulations that would actually guide us on how we collect, how we store, how we share, and how we maintain that data in our systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Imagine a database of all the 1.4 billion people in Africa, all together and accessible by all Africans. That would create one of the most robust data centers in the world, and I'm sure it will bring a lot of social, economic, and political value to all of us as a people in Africa. I saw one last hand there next to Honorable before I allow Dr. Alson. Yes, sir.
Merci. C'est une intervention à titre d'information, parce qu'on a parlé tout à l'heure de l'intelligence artificielle. Et donc, du coup, je voulais saisir cette occasion pour informer ici que tout le monde, qu'évidemment, c'est une technologie qui est en train d'arriver. Et cette technologie est évidemment nourrie par les données. Donc, il n'y a pas d'intelligence artificielle s'il n'y a pas de données. Et l'intelligence artificielle est une technologie qui est vraiment un grand consommateur des données. Cela nécessite évidemment une très bonne législation en matière de données. Alors, l'information que je voulais vous donner ici, c'est vous dire que nous ne sommes pas vraiment en arrière par rapport à cette technologie, parce qu'aujourd'hui, la République du Congo a été choisie comme pays où on a hébergé le Centre africain de recherche en intelligence artificielle. Donc, nous sommes déjà dans le processus de pouvoir faire agréer ce centre au niveau de la communauté régionale qui est donc la CEIAC. Et après la CEIAC, évidemment, l'Union africaine va juste acter pour que ce centre soit vraiment déjà reconnu comme étant un centre africain. Et donc, sur ce, j'encourage ici tous les Africains présents dans cette salle, surtout les femmes, je les encourage beaucoup à à visiter le centre, ou encore le centre, il est déjà en ligne. Hein, pour ceux qui veulent avoir plus d'informations concernant ce centre africain de recherche, de se rapprocher de moi, je peux leur donner un peu plus de détails. Merci beaucoup pour cette information.
Thank you very much for that intervention about the African Center for Data. I think it's a welcome idea. Maybe we'll read more about it, because for sure we need such centers and many more to ensure that Africans can have quick access to African data. Dr. Alson.
Thank you so much. I know you're trying to finish off the session, Wes. So, I just wanted to take the opportunity to point out, particularly in relation to the last few comments that are appealing for a collaborative African framework and policy, that we do have the African Union Data Policy Framework in place. It was endorsed by member states earlier this year. The implementation plan for countries is proceeding and will be going to a validation workshop later in the month. It addresses precisely the issues of trying to create an enabling environment, a trusted environment for innovation, for fair competition, but importantly also for a redistribution of the benefits of data value creation on the continent and globally, because this needs to be governed at a global level if we're going to see a better, less uneven distribution of the opportunities that are associated with datification and digitalization, and of course mitigates the harms. So lovely to hear from the data protector from Nigeria, but the impetus for data sharing in integrated data management systems within countries, within public sectors. This is really in a very, very comprehensive policy. It's been engaged in on the continent. Please do engage with it for this process, because I think it's obviously critical to where our status is and where we really hoping to be in a short period of time. And just to make the last point, that there's also a lot of emphasis in our document, which isn't in many of the other broader data policy frameworks, although I think it's emerging in the literature, on public value. And I think that's just a really important aspect of data value creation on the continent, and that is really sort of untapped potential that we can use both in terms of post-COVID economic reconstruction, but also longer term development. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alson, for that intervention. I think I now allow the panelists to give their closing parts and comments, and see how we can move and really derive the benefits out of this discussion for the good of our continent. I'll begin with Lillian, and your closing parts.
Thank you, Chair. And I think this has been really a fruitful conversation, but my departing remarks would be that I think from the comments, from the reaction to the survey and findings, we realize the new challenges that the digital world has brought, and the need for data protection, whether it is artificial intelligence, whether it's enabling trade, whether it's issues of digital services. And for me, yes, having the enabling environment in terms of, say, legislation and regulation, whether at regional or national level, is important. However, my caution would be that these limitations that are coming into the legislations that are limiting the free flow of data may put us backward. We are taking, say, one step forward and taking two backward. So there has to be careful consideration when states start imposing or introducing these localization requirements. To whose benefit are they, putting in these kind of, limitations? So, or rather also requirements. So my closing remarks is, we need all these things, but there has to be very careful considerations for who are they to benefit. If it is indeed the citizens, then the privacy of our data should be at the prime. If it is indeed for economic benefit, then we need to also understand, like I think my brother from from Gambia was saying that, our data is in the cloud. So we cannot limit, we cannot run from what is happening at the global world, So we need to find a way of feeding into that to ensure that we are all, benefiting in enabling global economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lillian, for those comments. Honorable.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. And what I would like to say in conclusion is that it is my hope that now that we have the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance, iJurisdiction and other key partners are going to find ways in which we can work together, especially in capacitating us on these issues of data, and particularly data jurisdiction and all that comes with it, so that we can also be able to advocate and champion for the same in our respective national parliaments. But also whenever we discuss things at a high level, I think when dealing with us as parliamentarians, it's also important to drill down into the different country perspectives and situations and comparison between countries. So for example, parliamentarians from East Africa community, it would be very interesting to know on these particular issues that, jurisdiction just presented. Where does Kenya stand? Where does Tanzania stand? Where does Uganda stand? Burundi, Rwanda? Then, they can advocate and champion it as a bloc, the same as ECOWAS. And then also at continental level on these things that have been presented. What is the alignment with the different continental agreements which our heads of state have signed up for? And where are we towards the implementation of that? So if we can get those kind of understanding, it can inform us better, and then we can be in a better position to even come up with our own interventions. We'll be well informed. But one thing that I can assure you is that we're ready to work with all of you. And we have a very robust MP network right now of members from about 20 countries. And we're hoping to make sure that the network will remain close-knit, but we'll have at least one MP from every country on the African continent. And the key criteria of MPs being a member is one, even if you're not in ICT committee, but you need to be interested in the topic, and you need to have proof that you have once spoken about issues related to ICT, digital development policies, etc., in our respective parliaments, because we just don't want to be talking in conferences like this. We have to also talk in the houses. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable, and we'll be looking forward to more of your output and further support to this initiative. Thank you very much. Yes, Madam Onika.
Great. Thank you once again for having me in this conversation. And I just want to thank Alison for that reminder about the AU data policy framework, because for me, it is actually an example of a beginning point for us to address the trust deficit that clearly exists amongst most of our stakeholders, and is a big part of the challenges that we are facing with the protectionist type approach that we are seeing the development of data in the region. So really great. But I just like to conclude by reminding us that while we are developing and looking at data and cross-border flow of data, it's really important for us to always remember that data exists within the broader ecosystem of connected people, connected things, connected governments, and that our digital development still has a long ways to go to ensure that every African who wants to be online actually has the means and the access to be able to do so, both from in terms of the actual connectivity being available where they live or work or go to school, and actually being able to afford the devices. So it's really important that as we look at developing our data, to think about it from an inclusive point of view that we need to not leave any African behind. So connectivity is still very much our anchor point for us to advance in this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Monica, for crowning it all well. And I thank you all, colleagues, for the active participation, for the comments. I think all of us draw many lessons out of these kind of interactions. And once again, to remind all of us to participate in the online data survey, please share your comments, your ideas, such we can have some documented process on how we can improve and harmonize data policy issues in Africa. From me and my colleagues on the panel, we thank you. I think I hand over to Tracy to officially close this session. Asante sana. Shukran.
Thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you very much to Waiswa Budu Salam for moderating the session. I don't have anything more to say, given you gave a nice closing, but what I can say is that, you know, we've had a great session today, and I hope that everyone present feels inspired and motivated to carry on the work that you've been introduced to or reintroduced to, and to contribute to the data collection, as we have mentioned throughout today's session, and that it is our collective journey towards Africa 2063 and to the Africa we want. And if I could end on 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and of course, connection. Thank you to everyone that was here today and to everyone online and for staying with us. Hope to see you soon. Bye.
The link is going to be shared.
If you're still with us online as well, there is a sheet of paper, and if you could fill out your names and let us know if you would like to contribute. Thank you very much. And for those of us still in the room, I like the sound of my voice. If we could take a picture in the corner over here. Thank you.
Folks, come for the group photo before you leave. Come for the group photo, please. Please come for the group photo. Yeah.